Although Guatemala has the largest economy in Central America, the majority of Guatemalans have not benefited from the profits of their economy. Over 75% of the population lives below the poverty line and has struggled to maintain an acceptable standard of living. International agencies say half of the population is unable to provide their families with the most basic food needs. Guatemala has the highest GDP in the region, but it is extremely unevenly distributed amongst the classes. The poorest 10% of the population takes 0.6% of the national income, while the wealthiest 10% of the population takes 46.6% of the national income. This picture was taken at a very prestigious hotel in Antigua, and you can see the difference in class, looking at people who can afford to stay here and people who have to work here. Huge discrepancies exist between the lower and upper class in many different aspects. Because of these discrepancies, poor Guatemalans are forced to use alternative methods to maintain a lifestyle appropriate for survival. Although the lower and upper class are drastically different, they do share something in common. The idea of relative solidarity comes into play when showing the similarity that families, poor and wealthy, keep their wealth and traditions within their families. This is a look at how poor families get their wealth, what they strive on in order to maintain their wealth, and whom they pass their wealth to and why. This video will also look at how the wealthy families pass down their wealth, the extremes they will go to keep the wealth within the upper class, and businesses they own which provide them with their wealth. When looking at a poor community such as Kawits, we can see how the wealth of a family is easily passed down upon generations. Many family homes consist of grandparents, uncles and aunts, cousins, and infants, and if a family member decides to move out, this typically means moving next door. Family members constantly rely on each other to act as a source of income. With such a large family living either within the same home or in the same vicinity, families can become dependent on the family business as a source of income. Many families must also rely on going to the United States, for a couple years at least, in order to obtain money for their families. This picture shows a baker in the Guatemalan community of Kawits. His name is Sebastian, and he is a very entrepreneurial person. He owns 5 businesses, including coffee making, selling pigs, cutting wood, making women's skirts, and his newest accomplishment, becoming a baker. He became a baker after his mother-in-law taught him her secrets in baking. From the years 2000 to 2006, he worked in the United States, working to find sufficient funds for his family back in Guatemala. When he got back to Guatemala, he was able to build a home for his family with the money he earned. In a community like Kawits, he is considered wealthy because his home is made out of cinder blocks. He and his family are able to maintain their wealth with these 5 businesses, and especially because of Sebastian's visit to the United States. Sebastian's eldest son, a 16-year-old named Martin, although not pictured, has recently dropped out of school. His reasoning for leaving school was because he wanted to help his father and learn the businesses in which his father is involved. Communities and families living closer to cities can be seen to rely on similar methods of gaining money, such as going to the United States, but they also rely on methods which come easily to the area in which they live. Families and small organizations working in cities like Antigua, Chichicastenango, and Panajachel rely on the industry of tourism. At the women's co-op, a younger girl watches as an elder in her community dances a traditional dance in front of a small tourist group. The women's co-op in Antigua and Lima, a natural dyeing textile organization, rely on tourists to buy their products and learn about their organization's purposes. Guatemalans working in the famous markets of Chichi and Antigua are able to support their families because of tourism. All of the members of a given family can be found selling their family's goods at these markets. As you can see from the picture, there is a mother and child sitting at their designated booth, waiting to sell their products. Children are even involved in the process because they use their sweet, innocent faces to persuade tourists to buy something from them. It is a good tactic, and they do whatever they can to get money for their family. Children learn at a young age how to sell goods, and thus are able to easily take over the family business when the time comes. On the opposite end of the class spectrum, wealthier families seem to have things a little easier in their lives. As opposed to having to work multiple jobs or having their children work, the wealthy class has the privilege to be born into wealth and thus have their wealth handed to them. Wealthier families thrive on the monopolies they have created and also on the success of the Guatemalan coffee industry. In Guatemala City, the upper class lives in Zone 14, a very prestigious zone with an amazing view of the city. Many other upper class families can be found living on the southern coast of Guatemala. One very prestigious family owns very prominent industries throughout Guatemala. These industries include owning multiple beverage companies and also the most lavish hotel in Antigua. Although this family has had several family feuds causing some family members to branch off and create their own businesses, they still have succeeded in the business industry and now greatly benefit from the empire they have created. In order to keep the wealth within the upper class, many families marry into other prominent families and sometimes resort to certain inappropriate relations. The ownership of these monopolies has been passed down through generations, and the wealth is easily inherited within these upper class families. The wealth remains in the small upper class because these families want to preserve the power they hold. The coffee industry in Central America is very large and very competitive. Guatemala has the largest export of coffee in all of Central America. Because the coffee industry is so dominant, it is often a key source of income for many families, both poor and wealthy. However, the families which benefit most from this industry are those in the upper class. They are able to purchase large plantations, hire many employees, and thus obtain controlling portions of the exports leaving Guatemala. A very prominent coffee plantation in Antigua, Guatemala, has been owned by the same family for over 125 years. In 1883, the plantation was purchased and has since then been passed down 4 generations to the current owner, Ricardo. Although Ricardo got an engineering degree and was living in the United States, he came back to Guatemala to run the family business. With his new knowledge in engineering, he was able to improve the coffee-making process using more efficient equipment. Ricardo is also an entrepreneurial person and has increased the profits of his family's business by creating more businesses on their property, such as a museum, horse farm, and many other new ventures. Although this discrepancy between class is largely visible, these classes do share similar traditions. Lower class families become creative when trying to increase their family income. It is typical for having younger generations take over a business because the family needs to maintain their primary source of income. Wealthier families also choose to pass down their wealth to younger generations. These families control large monopolies and acquire large sums of money from the success of the coffee industry. For both classes, a family's wealth is deemed important and is thus necessary to be passed down through the generations.